planning for retirement scares a lot of people because they're unsure what kind of cash flow they can expect when they retire. So either by themselves or by using a financial calculator online or some advisor, they look at a way to figure out, hey, this is the nest egg that I have. What kind of income can I sustain for the rest of my life? I think it's a little bit backwards. If you want to plan properly for retirement, you should actually look at what you're hoping to spend and then take the time to see if you have enough to meet those needs, and being very intentional about when those specific goals and those specific expenditures are going to happen. A lot of pension funds operate this way. They look at liability matching. Unless you know exactly what kind of liability or cash flow you have to meet any given year, it's going to be very difficult for you to plan your draws around that. And that's really what you're solving when you enter retirement, is how can you mindfully decumulate? You're not just throwing everything into an investment portfolio and looking for average rates of return. It's about what you actually get to spend, because you're now taking your nest egg and turning that into your paycheck. But how much that paycheck needs to be any given year can't be dictated by anyone else but you. You have to look into your goals, your values, and what you want to happen in different stages in different years of your retirement. When you look at a traditional retirement plan, most of the time it looks like this. You take your number, take whatever nest egg you have, plug that into a calculator, and it tells you, after some assumptions and some inflation calculations and projections there, it'll show you that based on this X number of dollars that you have set aside, you can spend this much, adjust that for inflation until life expectancy. This is an actual case. Obviously, I've anonymized this. A client or a prospective client approached me saying, hey, look, I think I can spend $8,000 a month after taxes well until I'm gone. So this is what his picture would look like. $96,000 a year, inflate that by a certain inflation figure, and we can play around with that. But here's a challenge. He gets to year 20, 24, 25, 26, and that $96,000 today, he would need to draw about $161,000 to match that purely from an inflation hedge. That does not take his own real spending plan into account. How I want you to fix this is by looking at specific goals on top of your day-to-day lifestyle. So when clients work with us, this is what we actually do. This is a simplified version, as simple as I can make it on YouTube. I use a different software for this, but I wanted to create something simpler so that I can make it available for you. If what you're watching right now seems like something that you want to try on your own, stick around, because at the end of the video, I'll show you how you can get access to this worksheet. So the question is that $8,000 a month really his target? Is it really this client's target? And I walk them through, just looking back, what do you actually spend on a monthly basis? Just what it costs to keep the lights on and everything else, your baseline. And he told me that that's actually much closer to $5,000 a month. So that's the number that we use. If it's $4,000 for you, I would just change this to $4,000, but let's stick to $5,000 here. And then I then add the individual goals instead of lumping them all into this one cash flow. So let's pretend that you have a desire to help with your kid's wedding, and that's happening next year or within the next year. You're going to put $20,000 assigned to that, but that's really just happening once. It starts next year and it doesn't happen again. So for how long? It'll only go on for 1 year. And the next goal is travel. Most people talk about travel as if that's the sole determinant of how much more fun and how much more spending they're going to be doing in retirement. At this point, I've said it again and again in the channel, but you hear about the go-go years, the no-go years, and the slow-go years. Essentially, the older you get, the less likely you are to be traveling more extensively because health will no longer allow you to do that. I believe that over-indexes your spending on travel alone. There's other things that happens in your life, but I do agree to some extent where travel will change. In this case, we'll just treat it as two different stages for now. So for the first initial stages of retirement, this family, maybe they're comfortable with $20,000. And they spend that every year. It starts at year 0. Health-wise, they're good doing that for 10 years. After the first 10 years, it's reasonable to expect that most of the bucket list items for travel has been ticked off. Maybe you're no longer traveling international, you're now more local. So after that, stage 2, that's your cash flow goal number 3 in this case. Yeah, maybe $10,000, we'll keep that. And that starts at year 10. That only lasts for 5 years. This is a goal that most people forget to think about. Just because you retire doesn't mean you stop driving, you stop being mobile. If you're a household that has replaced your vehicle every 5 years or every 10 years, before you stop yourself and say, I'll never buy a car again, let's put that into the benchmark first, and then we can make adjustments. We'll make some adjustments to this later on because there's some stuff here that I want to show you. Let's say, I don't know what a car goes for nowadays, but a decent vehicle, $70,000 is probably a good idea. You can notice here that I have car 1, 2, and 3, essentially benchmark to happen every 5 years. I'm replacing this vehicle, and then I'm keeping it around the same piece, the same budget. So the first vehicle, the first purchase happens in year 5. I only do that once. In the next goal then is 5 years after that. So year 10, I'm replacing that car again, or I'm buying a car. I'm not sure if I'm replacing it or keeping it. The cash flow here would change if you're trading in, right? Like so put that into consideration. At this stage, it's prudent not to take any cash inflows into account. I'm just looking at what's coming out. Then the third car, potentially the final vehicle that you'll purchase in your life, is going to happen 15 years after retirement. So if you retire at 65, replacing your car one last time at 80 is probably realistic. The goal here could be different for you, but I just want to show you another item. Let's say you have a cottage or you have a secondary property. It's probably a good idea to make the renovations or future proofing for your real estate. It's probably a good idea to do that, at least the first set of renovations, to do that while you're working, unless time doesn't permit you to do so. I've just seen again and again that clients are more comfortable spending on these big ticket items if they're still taking a paycheck. So in this case, they need to renovate a secondary property for their enjoyment, and they were going to do that immediately. So they're going to spend about $10,000 on renovating the cottage and fixing the floors. So that starts today, so year 0, and they only need to do that once. They do have a big gripe about their cottage as far as the kitchen is concerned in the entertainment area. In this early stage, we just guessed and then said, hey, just to spruce up the kitchen, it's probably going to be $50,000, but we don't want to commit to that right now. We're okay living with a kitchen as it is, and we'll undertake that in 5 years. So same thing. That happens in 5 years. It only happens one time. Here's one that would probably be reflective for a lot of you. Helping your kids get into their first home. For this case, it was multiple children. They wanted to give $100,000 worth of down payments. And we had to time out or put in timelines, when the kids would actually be ready to undertake a home purchase and look after the mortgage. This family was only interested in providing for the down payment. This is important because even if you can give the down payment to your kids, if they are not ready to sustain it, it's probably not a good idea to force them to buy the property right now, even if mathematically that makes sense. So realistically speaking, their kids weren't ready for another 7 years. And we put that on the timeline. Their primary home, they don't need to do any renos right now because they just did one. However, if the goal is for them to stay in their home for as long as possible, there will inevitably a time where they have to refresh or fix the place that they live in. So in this case, we guessed at $75,000 based on what they're thinking about doing to just make it more accessible, make it so that it's a curbless shower, that type of thing. It's really focused towards aging and mobility and access. So you can see now this is significantly different than just saying, hey, you have enough to sustain $8,000 a month adjusted to inflation. Let's focus on the travel first. Let me go back to just comparing this to the base and the traditional spending. If all we focused on was the everyday living, obviously they're going to have more money than they need. And if we look at the travel, this gets us a little bit closer. So stage 1 of travel, early travel until year 9, 10, that's here. And then it reduces thereafter. So if we plotted everything else that they're trying to accomplish, this is more reflective of real life. And I think it'll be the same for you. This line here represents the retirement plan that you would get from a base calculator or just a simple, how much can I spend based on what I've saved? This is what I want your cash flow to look like visually, at least the initial stage. There's some problems here that I would like you to address if you play around with this or if you're working with your advisor and you're plotting this visually. There is huge spikes here. So this is part of our draft meeting when I'm walking my clients through this, is that by plotting all of these cash flow items visually like this, we can see if there is any given year where we would potentially run into more complex issues aside from cash flow. What I'm saying is that if you look at the years where there was a significant spike, there's a few challenges that brings to us. Number one is that forces us up into a much higher tax bracket. Number two, it forces you to withdraw a big chunk of your assets on a specific year instead of smoothing it out. The challenge with that is that if that happens to be a poor market or that happens to be a bad market, I'm not sure you'll have the confidence to really execute on all those goals. If I look at this again, the reason why year 10 is so expensive, so to speak, is that you still have your base spending based on what we've plotted in and in travel. Plus, they're also hoping to buy a car that year, and then the whole reno is going to happen. So by doing it this way, you can easily look, there's too much pressure, there's too much strain financially that's going to happen in year 5, year 7, and year 10. So what can you do? Well, the first idea is in what of these items can we actually move in our timeline so that we are smoothing our spending. This is too aggressive of a draw for an individual year. So if I go back to our cash flow and then let's fix that. So, hey, are you comfortable delaying the car purchase? Can you do that in year 6 perhaps? And what else are we going to run into at year 6? Aside from travel, that's the only one. So let's go back to our table. That's significantly better. How about year 10? Here's one way of smoothing this. Maybe this really is just too big of a ticket item, too expensive of an item to handle all at once. You can think about your relationship with debt. Does it make sense for you to perhaps finance the renovation and pay it off over 2, 3, 4, 5 years? So we're going to look at the exact same goal now, which is the primary home renovation. But instead of treating it as a single $75,000 expense, let's say we finance it. It ends up costing $80,000 instead, but that $80,000 is broken up into 4 years of payments. So this becomes $20,000 a year from year 10, and it's going to last for 4 years. Let's go back to this. So now we don't have that crazy spike in year 10. We'll do the same thing for the vehicle. I put these goals here specifically because they are things that you can easily finance even if you are retired. And I'm not saying this to advocate debt, by the way, but you just have to be really mindful of this. If you're just the type of person that really can't stand debt right now, that's going to be harder for you to do in retirement. But from a financial planning perspective, from a monetary in dollars perspective, it might make sense for you to pay interest versus paying taxes and versus realizing losses if your portfolio is down significantly that year. That's a separate topic altogether. I've just addressed kind of smoothing out cash flow and planning around it. Let's look at the vehicles. If your goal is to buy that $70,000 car, let's call it $75,000 then, but then you are breaking up the payments over 3 years. So it's $25,000, starts at year 6, and you're doing that over there. And let's do that again for the second vehicle, then you're financing that again over 3 years. Car 3, same thing. There you go. So if I'm looking at this is significantly smoother than before. What's our last issue here? The down payment for the children. This is where you check your values and your goals. Is it more important for you to smooth this out? Or is it more important to you to just be ready to give it to the kids? We can approach this a totally different way. We can then say, you know what, the kids are not ready for another 7 years, but we would like to start taking money out of our investments and putting that in a separate account so that when they're ready to buy the house, it's there. You can do that right now. Actually, you can do this with, if you trust them, if they're fit for it, you can actually get them to open their first home savings account and you're transferring monies to them. It's up to them to make that deposit, putting it into their first home savings account. They get the deduction for it. They don't need to claim that deduction the year they make that deposit. But for you, it might actually, from a return perspective, from a planning perspective, instead of having massive spikes like this, which is not good for taxes, maybe start setting that aside ahead of time. So the down payment for the kids, let's say it's $20,000 a year, and it's going to start in year 2, and you got to do that over 5 years. So if you rewind this video, this is not as expensive tax-wise compared to where we started. Now, let me address why this is better and more reflective of life than this traditional retirement line right here. The biggest problem with this is that it just keeps inflating. You're spending the same amount. You get to 30 years into retirement. Most people really are not spending a lot of money here, even if there was a health concern. So the traditional retirement plan forces you to live on less than what you actually need, because based on the goals that you have, this line here is insufficient. But at the same time, you get older, when you don't need as much, you have too much from your cash flow. So I hope this is a good way to just get you to visualize how retirement spending should actually be. And if you're interested, comment workshop below, and I'll reach out to you to get you registered to our upcoming retirement workshop. That's going to be free. You'll have access to a version of this so that you can start plotting your retirement cash flow. My goal is to do that live so that you can even ask me questions as I'm presenting it. See you next week.